All right, this had better be a quick video. This is the third time I'm trying to record it. Yeah, so what I want to do here is I wanted to compare Triple Triad players across time, not to each other, but to compare the eras they were in. So to say, if you, for example, have a player who did really well in one era and dropped off in others, that might be an indication that those other eras are stronger. I'm using win percentage here, which is a somewhat limited number for a few reasons. One is it fails to adjust, like, you might be in an easier era, but happen to have played all the best players in that era and happen to have easier draws and tournaments in a different era, which was harder, right? There's going to be problems there. There's also going to be the problem that it doesn't tell you how many games they've played. Delhi played a whole lot of games in 2007-08 and put up a really high win percentage. Other times you'll see numbers like 66.7, not Midas's, he played a decent number of games. That's a bad one to click. But you might see Cookie here. Maybe he went 2-1. I tried to only include years where a player played at least 2 tournaments or at least 3 tournament games, but this is probably just going 2-1, right? This is a very small sample. This is less meaningful than this number is, not because it's lower, just because there's less evidence. If you look at a number and see that's really easily divisible by a small number, like 66.7, 33.3, 50, 75, 25, these numbers might indicate a really small sample of games that year. A 0 or 100 could also do that. There's only one 100 with not many games played. This was a 3-0 year. So I gave that one an asterisk, but Seto obviously 80% plus over this period. Another thing to be careful of, especially in the modern era where there are fewer rounds and you are so likely to play the same set of players, is what I might call the Doc Evil effect of if one player is unbelievably dominant and not listed here, then everyone else's numbers in that era might look lower, and you might think that era is tougher. And in one sense, it is because Doc Evil or whoever is there, but in another sense, it's just like one person warping the field's effect. Um, or alternatively, you might see a player really dominate a period and then drop off a little and conclude that next era was really strong, but actually the player just like stopped caring at all. So, what I would really suggest when looking at this chart is I put the players who had played the most tournaments basically, plus a few at the end that I thought were interesting, like Kaus and Mafi Josie and Broccoli and Akiyama. I think those 4 were the 4 I picked as just ones I was interested in seeing. Um, you if you take a player and you're like, I am familiar with when they were better or worse, either because you played them and have a good sense of them over different periods of time, or because you've talked to them. Like, Vid has talked openly about like he thinks he was way stronger in this era than he was in this one. He just got much better as a player. And I think there was kind of I don't know if this is exactly the case here, but there was kind of this Yojimbo effect of people who were in Brotherhood of Seed just got genuinely much better at the game. Really interesting effect Yojimbo had among his many interesting effects. Um, and so, yeah, this period he could be a much better player than he was here. And that would explain some of the numerical disparity, but also might mean that these numbers are actually inflated compared to these numbers, right? You take a player you're familiar with, you look at their numbers, and you try to fit your theory of when they were good with the numbers, and that'll tell you a bit about the era they played in, right? Because if a player looks flat and you're like, actually, Kamikaze got way better over time, then the fact that this looks flat suggests this period is weaker. Or you might say Kamikaze put in a ton of effort early and then stopped caring, and you might be like, okay, this looks pretty flat. This period is probably not like stronger than the previous era, right? We can draw conclusions. We start with numbers, but then we apply what we know and we see if we can draw interesting conclusions from it. I will also note, like, obviously, every one of these people is an individual with their own psychology. There are people who, after they have a really deep run, stop trying. There are people who, do all kinds of different things. The point of having a bunch of people on this list is to have different things you can point to. Another important thing is just any percentage 40% above means you're at least an average tournament player during that time period. Based on the way tournaments work, half the field is cut every round, which means you are facing tougher and tougher opposition. The first round of a tournament is the only one where you are on average facing an average person in the field. Every one past that, you are facing like on average 75th percentile or 88th percentile. and that means win percentages are lower than they would be in a league format or other types of formats. Um, which is always worth noting before we. And again, this is not to compare these players to each other. I don't think win percentages are the best way to do that. They are. I'm trying to compare eras. I didn't draw any really strong conclusions looking at this, but I'm really hoping someone else does. I wanted to provide the material and see if anyone else had insights into what periods they thought were stronger or weaker. I will just give my general opinion, which I don't think is particularly well supported by this, um, but it is my general opinion. 2004 to '06, often combo was not used in rule sets, or when it was used with very peculiar sets of rules. I would say this is somewhat a different game, not entirely, but somewhat, and that I personally, there's some very impressive things in '06, until the '06 tournaments, I value it a little less. I do think like we build on the shoulders of giants, right? The reason games get better over time is because we learn from what other people have done. You're competing against what other people have done, and you're learning to be better than that, right? It is no slight to say a previous era was weaker. It is simply saying a previous era was built upon to reach later, stronger eras. My general thought is something like this range, for me, the quality of play was probably lower. At some point between 2006 and maybe 2008, I think the quality of play gets stronger. In my heyday, which is really like 2009 to 11 or 12, I did not think there were substantial changes in level of play. I thought who happened to be really good changed. I thought the competition was difficult throughout. Um, And I think at some point in here, Yojimbo surpasses me, which obviously personally, as he was like my arch rival, was a big deal. But I didn't think the general level changed much. Like I thought I was much worse in 2012 than I was in 2009-10. And my results, which aren't listed here because I just didn't have enough tournaments and I don't think I'm a particularly interesting player for stuff like this. Um, and I figured I'd talk about myself anyway, so why give myself more excuse to? Um, my results against the field were still really good in 2011-12, even though I thought I was a significantly worse player. Um, but Yojimbo started being fantastic, so that was a major effect on me. But I didn't think the overall field had particularly changed. Though I kept doing better than I expected to, so maybe I would argue it got a little worse. I think at some point, a lot of the really good players start dropping off. Not near all of them, but a lot of them. So I think at some point here, it gets a little worse. It's clearly a little worse by kind of 2015 to 17. Um, and this should be 25, 26. Um, there's clearly enough of the top players have stopped playing by then that it drops off a bit. Then it comes back pretty strong. When I tried to do analysis on the tournament game records we have, I didn't do the whole current period because I haven't done much for a while. But what I had suggested that the level of play was pretty steady in the return. There were weaker tournaments, there were stronger tournaments, but there was no general trajectory to things are getting better or worse, is what I found there, and that's what I tend to guess. Um, 2022 had more players because it was the initial burst of excitement in the return, but those weren't necessarily stronger players. Sometimes you will see something where stronger players drop out, but other players are getting better. So it looks like level of play remains steady, but actually level of play was improving. Just the field was getting reduced. That can happen too. Something to keep an eye on. The one other thing I wanted to say, just because he was here, I wanted to say a few things about a couple players that I don't think I talk about perhaps as much as I should. And the first was Tezuka. I think Tezuka's win in TTAC 14 and just that tournament as a whole, that's one of my favorite tournaments in the return. I really want to do a deep dive at some point because especially that final game where Tezuka comes in with a hand designed to start Lena A368, not a power card, in one weak corner. Now, sure, you see weak corner starters, but this was a designed weak corner starter, and both Deli and I had the same instinct for what Piggy should play against it. And it was kind of, okay, you've played a weak corner that does not challenge me. I can play an opposite corner that I think does put real challenge on you. And then the solver said this move was just losing. Tezuka found a move which looked like it applied minimal pressure and built a hand to play the move. This was very planned and figured out. Um, that against a move that was both Deli and Mai's, like, not just first instinct, but I looked at it for a bit and I was like, this just looks really good. Absolutely losing on the spot against a weak corner. I like weak corners. I think weak corners are good for setting up a game where you will have something easy to retake and hopefully you can find moves later to apply pressure. But he did a weak corner that just immediately applied a shocking amount of pressure. I think it's a fascinating game. I think if there's kind of one tournament I want to go back to and that I wish I like understood, because also that's the tournament where Chickeny makes this unbelievable move against Metis with Elemental. Like, if there's one tournament I wish I could understand every game played, and it would like just make me a much deeper, smarter, more thoughtful triple triad player, that's the one that jumps out at me as like a tournament as a whole. Really cool tournament, really cool win for Tezuka. Um, I think stands the test of time. Um, Another thing I wanted to say was, yeah, Metis looks really consistent here, but Metis's tournament results are always in a kind of weird pattern where he starts getting good results and then he makes a finals and then he drops off. And I don't know Metis particularly well, so like I shouldn't speculate about people's psychology here. I get the impression that like he makes his finals and then he has lost his kind of, which is not to say he's like not trying in the finals, but like he makes the finals, putting in effort, playing just absolutely great triple triad. Really precise player. I've said this before. I think one of the best skills in triple triad is when in slightly challenging positions, finding a way to make sure it is not dangerous. Just like having this really good sense of this could get dangerous and I can calculate my way out of it so that I just get out of the game and I'm safe. And I think Metis is one of the best players at doing that. And I think that's a fantastic triple triad skill. And like when I am at my best, I think that's my probably best skill too. And he's one of the people that comes to mind as having that skill at a really, really high level of just this really good sense of when to just neutralize a position and how to do so, and does so really, really well. Um, Also, actually, on Metis, he's the first player I ever saw. I know Nimloth did some Occult fan articles, but the first player I ever saw doing this was Metis, taking positions from a game he played, just screenshotting the positions and just talking, like writing down his thoughts, and he put them in some clan forum. And I found that really inspiring because I'd never really seen someone else's thoughts laid out. And we all think about the game in such different ways. Like, it's so easy to see someone else's thoughts and go, that's such a weird way to think about this. And it was really neat to see someone in detail someone else's thoughts because it opened horizons. And it's what I ended up trying to do. A lot of it I've tried to do in videos, and a lot of that was initially sparked by Metis doing it. Is there anyone else I really wanted to talk about? Jadat's actually another person who he never like put it in long form, but just seeing how he thought about positions at all was really fascinating for me because he struck me as having such a different perspective, but so able to find really powerful ideas and ones that weren't really on my horizon, where I'm sort of I'm not the most creative thinker. It's not to say I don't do some creative things, but I paint within the lines, right? I I figure things out and I try to optimize those things and do them at a really high level. But I think there are more exploratory thinkers, and seeing bits of Jadat's thinking was really useful to me for thinking about better exploratory kinds of thinking in Triple Triad. Uh, for anyone else, I have things to say that I don't think I've said over and over and over again in my videos. Probably not. So my request to you, dear viewer, is look at this, think about someone you know, and let me know what you think about the strength of different eras. Uh, I guess one last point is, generally speaking, play improves over time in games. Um, but also if less people are going into it. Like you can look at sports, right? Baseball is getting less popular in the US, fewer and fewer people are going into it. Um, it is not necessarily the big draw for young athletes. If young athletes start switching which sport they're going into, time will pass, new things will be figured out, but maybe the sport won't be played at a higher level because not as good athletes are going into it, kind of thing. You see a kind of similar thing with StarCraft One. Of every top player in StarCraft, except like one or two, was playing in 2010, right? And basically every top triple triad player was playing in like 2008, except Akiyama, right? Um, so if that's the case, it could be that those players are getting better, but if they're not, the field might be weakening or stagnating. And that's something that can definitely happen too. So I don't think there's some obvious like play should always get better. It should usually trend towards better. The assumption should be that it's getting better over time. But it isn't always the case. And I thought maybe some chart like this where you could see a bunch of players who played for a long time might give insight. But again, I looking at this didn't really have any insight. I hope you do. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on this. And I also don't think saying that the game gets better is detracting from what early players did. But I do think it's cool when we have records of those early players. Like Nimloth wrote some strategy stuff, and I have put what he said in the solver, and what he said is basically just true. And not just true on the level of like he said this move is losing and it's losing, but true on the level of he said like this is my favorite move here. And okay, not the most in-depth check, but like it probably is the highest pressure move in the position. Um, so it's really cool to see really deep thinking early, but also, more stuff should be figured out over time. That's good. That's what's supposed to happen. Anyway, thought this might be interesting to look at. Didn't really get anywhere, but so it goes.